Welcome to the California Landscape Stewardship second lunchtime meet and greet. These meet and greets are designed to introduce state leaders to our community of stewardship practitioners across California. And today we are so fortunate to be joined by our new California State Parks Director, Armando Quintero, and his interviewer, Yakuta Poonawalla with the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. My name's Sharon Farrell, and I lead the projects, stewardship, and science programs at the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy in San Francisco. The Conservancy provides the backbone support to the California Landscape Stewardship Network, and I have the privilege for facilitating that support. For those of you not familiar with the network, we're a diverse range of about 240 partnerships and organizations who've come together across the state, really to facilitate peer learning and exchange, share best practices and tools, and to promote innovation among land stewardship practitioners and colleagues. Catalyzed by the energy of about 20 people in 2016 in a small meeting in San Francisco, we're a volunteer-led network of networks who include federal and state and local agencies, nonprofits, academic institutions, and private land managers. While some of these partners have been working together for decades, other networks are still emerging, and we seek to amplify this work everywhere. So to today, I've known Armando for 25 years. I'm dating myself, and you can probably tell by the color of my hair. And we first started working together in the National Park Service, and more recently with our work with the Wantam Partnership in Marin County. All I can say is Armando's passion for California landscapes and parks runs deep, as does his understanding about the importance and value of working collaboratively across boundaries and across cultures. Today, he's joined by Yakuta Poonawalla, who leads community stewardship programs in the San Francisco Bay Area. Yakuta brings equal passion for fostering deep connections between people and land. Inspired by each other's work, Yakuta and Armando bring their experiences and strengths to the state and national working group, who is currently working on developing curriculum and opportunities to teach collaborative leadership skills. So we brought them together purposely. For all of you, we'll save the last 15 and 20 minutes for questions, which we'll do through the Q&A. And I just invite you to share those questions in the spirit of today's meet and greet. So with that, let's now turn to Yakuta and Armando.
Thank you, Sharon. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really lovely to see where all people are coming from and zooming in from. Really happy to be sharing this space with you and my dear friend and colleague, Armando. And before we begin, I just wanted to take a moment of silence and acknowledge everything that is going on. I know we're all holding space for so much, and you still took that time to be with us for an hour. And knowing Armando, I've known him only for a year. So I'm envious of Sharon, who's known him for 25 years. But knowing him in the last 1 year and just having so many conversations with him, I know that we're going to walk away with just our wells full of hope and inspiration. But let's just take a moment of silence, and there's a lot of collective energy here, and let's bring in that energy here and also think of all the people who are impacted by the fires today, impacted by COVID, impacted with everything that's going around nationwide. So I invite you all in. And you can take a few deep breaths as well. That helps. Okay, great. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, Armando, and it's such an honor to have gotten to know you in the past year, to have leaned into many of the conversations that we've had. And I'm hoping that in the next hour, I know an hour is not enough, but I'm hoping that in the next hour, you can at least give us a peek into all the life experiences that you've had that have really inspired so many. You've been a mentor to so many. You've become my teacher, a friend. And so I'd love to actually begin by just asking you, you've been a mentor for so many people throughout your career, throughout the work that you've done. What inspires you, and who do you go to when when things are difficult or things are great?
Thank you, Yakuta, and also thanks to all of you who've joined us this afternoon. I am deeply humbled and honored, really. And, I might start my answer by saying this. A few weeks ago, a former colleague from National Parks called me to congratulate me on this role. And it was a young man who I had hired as a ranger back in the early 90s to work on Alcatraz. And this fellow was very gracious, and he said that I'd hired him into his dream job, and thank you so much. And this young man was diagnosed a few years ago with early age onset Alzheimer's, and a very sweet guy. And he pivoted from thanks for helping me get this job um, uh, to how great it was that I'd gotten this job. And I stopped him and I thanked him. And I said, you know what you just did? In a way that I've never really taken to heart before, is that I am a culmination of all the relationships that I have been in my work environment. And I said, so it's not just me going into this job, it's you and all of you, because we have all, we've all worked together, we've solved problems, we've had times when we didn't get along, but it's all additive. And it's the question you ask, Yakuta, is a big one. But I begin with that as sort of a foundational part of an answer. My daughters are my advisors. Those of you who know me know that my favorite advisors are children, because I'm always astonished at the wisdom and the clarity with which they will state things. And usually it's pretty funny, but oftentimes it is an unfiltered honesty that is an opportunity for us to rethink how we perceive the world. I do have a group of friends who I actually refer to as the wizards. And I refer to them by that title because it was a cartoon that I used to watch when I was a kid. And there was this turtle who would get himself into trouble. And whenever he was in trouble, he'd say, "Help, Mr. Wizard." And this wizard would appear out of nowhere and save him. And so I literally have a small group of friends, and I preface a note to them by saying, "Help, Mr. or Ms. Wizard." And then I pose the question that I need advice on. So it's a collective of people that I would put into that category. Yeah.
Thank you, Armando. We all need those wizards right now, more than ever before. And we've had a chance to connect during this pandemic briefly over Zoom, but we haven't had a chance to meet in person. And I'm curious to hear from you, Armando, what has emerged for you during this pandemic experience? If you can think or share a moment where you saw a reason for hope or where you drew courage from, maybe it would be your family, your colleagues, or your community, anything that you'd like to share about the last 6 months that we've been in this pandemic?
Thank you for that question. A little bit of reflection here in that those of you who know me know that I worked for National Parks for a little over 22 years. And then I actually left that career to be a full-time dad. And part of the reasoning for my leaving a wonderful and fun career as a park ranger was that I actually, at the time, and I was 42 at the time, felt like my wife had a really good position. Our daughters were 3 and 5. And I thought, I can take a break and actually discover who I am. And I saw that as just this profound opportunity. So in a weird way, this hiatus that I took from the age of 42 to 52, I didn't know how long it was going to be. I got to delve into the things that really mattered to me. I pursued the things that I love: music, art, teaching, natural history and field natural history. And it was a real luxury. And, and I've told folks that I think that everybody should take a half a year off or something and raise a puppy and play music and do artwork. And so your question about the pandemic is one where I had to I realized when the shelter in place started and things started to just snowball around us, that this was yet another opportunity to discover who I am, really, and what is foundational to my being, to my relationships. Who are the people that really matter on a daily basis, if you will? What does my work mean to me? And how do we navigate going forward? And I will mention one thing that I've shared with a number of you. Several years ago, I read a book called Deep Survival, and I gave it to my daughters, now in their mid-20s. I sent them each a copy and said, this book will save your life. And what it's about, in a nutshell, is that survival is about adaptive management. Survival is about assessing what's going on and doing the thing that really matters at that moment. Certainly in an emergency, that's what we all do. And that's why we're all here. We've somehow navigated these difficult things. And so I think of COVID, I mean, and this is COVID before social unrest. This is COVID before the fires. And now that we're dealing with all these fires, many of you working in natural resources know that the coming winter is a real threat. You know, with heavy rains post-fire, it can be yet another disaster. And so I find myself thinking about deep survival. And so what are the strengths that help us get through this? And it's going to be different for all of us, but that's what I think about with regards to the current pandemic that we're in.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Armando. And when you speak about strengths, something that I really enjoyed from our first meeting back in fall 2019 is that it was right at the beginning, as soon as we met, there was a lot of storytelling and sharing. And you were, that entire evening, we shared so many stories, and I was just so dumbstruck, but also so fascinated by all your life experiences here in the national park, in the GGNRA, and also in Kings Canyon and Sequoia National Park. And I'm wondering if you could share some life experiences that you really lean into that have shaped both your personal and your professional journey. I know you've told me a number of times that you're a student for life.
Yeah.
And so as a student, what are those life experiences that you think of? Maybe one or two experiences, or maybe just one that comes to your mind right now.
My parents did not did take us to parks. Although the weird thing is the earliest picture of me in a park is I'm standing at, oh geez, I can remember the name of it in a minute, a state park over in the Tehachapis, Fort Tejon. And I'm standing in a diaper looking at some camels in a cage. But it's because my parents were on their way to Mexicali to visit relatives, and that's where we stopped to have lunch. But other than that, my passion for wild places and wild creatures really came from National Geographic. And this was not in the digital age. So literally the magazines, and then my parents did not have very many books in the house. We had a Encyclopedia Britannica, and I like to draw. So I repeatedly drew all the birds in the bee section of the Encyclopedia Britannica. And that maybe this gives you insight into the rest of my life. But I really learned how to draw birds by looking at those images. Years later, when I'd become a national park ranger and I was in Washington, D.C., I had a break. And so I went over to the Smithsonian. I'd always wanted to go to the Smithsonian. And I went into the natural history section of the Smithsonian. And I turned the corner, and I know I started crying, because I turned the corner and there were all the birds that had been photographed for the Encyclopedia Britannica that I had studied for years. And so it was like walking into my imagination, if you will. And I was dumbstruck at the combination of emotions, but one of them was I had dreamt about these creatures and now they're right in front of me. And so a lot of what I've ended up doing is I'm I am passionate about stuff. So I learned how to scuba dive. I like to backpack. You know, I became an EMT. I did all those things that I thought that I should do, but also pursued the things that I loved. And and you guys all know this, that when you're working around the things that you're passionate about, you tend to meet other people who are passionate about the same things. And so the communities that I have found myself within in my life experience around parks and such is just stunning to me. But when I got this job, uh, I immediately got calls from people who I worked with in 1975, 1976. And so it is a network of relationships that shape us, I think. It certainly has shaped me. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but that's what comes to mind.
I love what you're bringing up, Armando, because we often forget to go back in time to that first moment or that first experience that really shaped the way we would continue to do our work. That aha moment, that transformative experience, and that's what you're defining here. That really created the foundation for you, and it's been over, I think, a little over 100 days for you in this position. Wow, I don't know how many days, but I know it's over 100 days. And what you're reminding me of, and what also brings to my mind right now, is the values that shape this work, the values that we bring to this work. What are some of those values that you find yourself going back to or leading with, that you will continue to use as tools as you further your work in this position?
Well, thank you. Thank you for that question. I've thought about this a lot. And, when I started, when I first said hello, I said that I was deeply, humbled and honored. And what I think about is that the experiences that I've had in parks, the experiences that I've had traveling around the world and pursuing the things that I just love, um, it was a lot of experiences, but it certainly doesn't make me an authority. It doesn't give me any special powers for decision making. In fact, or facing the challenges that we now face today. And this sort of pulls together a handful of threads of things that I've already mentioned. I think that we are in a moment where we all have to be awake. We have to be communicating now more than ever. Collaboration is essential because the decisions that we make um, have to be the best possible decisions that we can make. And that's not going to be dependent on one person. It's going to be the result of a collective. And when I have looked at this job, when you talk about values, um, I'm luxuriating in the moment of being a student in all seriousness. I mean, I'm reading on the history of different parks, the history of the agency, phases of things that have happened, contemporary problems. And these are some of the thoughts that have come to mind. One of them is that public lands do a great job of interpreting in depth, the geologic history of these places, the natural history and prehistory, and the prehistoric archaeology. All of that is a very focused part of the story, but yet we don't always do as good of a job with the human stories that connect. And and I think about how we tell the landscape stories of 1,000,000 years, of 2,000,000 years. And I feel like in all of California, certainly there is evidence that, people have lived in all quarters of California for well over 10,000 years. And so I feel like as fundamental as the natural history story is, the story of human presence is also really essential. And that all of the human presence in the state historically has been, and prehistorically, if you will, is a legitimate and important way of looking at the world. A little while ago, sometime in the last weeks, there was someone who said to me that they were seventh generation Californian. And, and I said, well, I said, I got my DNA report back, and almost a third of my DNA is Native American, going back, according to the report that I got, 10,000 years. I don't know how many generations that is. And so the way that I think of this is that as we think about the stories, I think that working with each other and finding language that creates the opportunity for equalization, if you will. And I think a great equalizer, imagine, is if we all thought about our 10,000-year heritage coming together here at this moment. And it's far beyond a couple of generations. And so I think, I mean, right now with everything that's going on, it's a real opportunity to reflect on the work that we're all engaged in. And also, it has everything to do with how we work together to create the strategies, the approaches, the problem solving that's going to carry us forward for the next century. I mean, none of us know what's going to happen tomorrow. And the fires of just the last 48 hours are behaving differently than the fires that we experienced just weeks ago. So it really demands that all of us sort of take off our glasses and maybe put on new lenses and work together. So that's what comes to mind.
Thank you, Armando. And I'm seeing a lot of questions. A couple of them in, and what you really named is, you named a few things. You named climate change, you named the current nationwide racial and social justice uprisings that we're seeing, and everything that we're seeing being impacted by the pandemic. And no longer are those, can we see those separately, right? They're all interconnected. And I would love to hear from you. How do you see parks playing a role, and you playing a role in leading some of this work? And as we witness and experience all of this, how do you see state parks responding to during these challenging times?
So your question is also really about fire, thinking of fire as a good example of what we're facing. Well, I can tell you what we're doing at Big Basin. What we, there's a work group that's already started doing the groundwork. And I think of it this way, is there's so many individuals and organizations that want to help, that I think that what we need to do as an agency or as a department is set the table for those conversations so that we all can start moving in the same direction and coordinating with each other so that we get all of the funding reimbursement, for example, from FEMA. So there's administrative functions that have to take place, which are really critical. Right now, we're already letting contracts to make sure that the roads get repaired before winter, that we take down the hazardous trees that could fall on the roads. And it's as you can imagine, it's millions of dollars of work. But I do think that if we can collectively put the lens of climate change on the solutions that we start considering, put the lens of the experiences that we're currently, the things that we're currently experiencing in terms of fire and disaster, and how do we plan for those in the future in terms of how do we build parks for this next 100 years. I think about access and equity and how we're going to need to work with communities to make sure that we're thinking about literally the cultures that are different than the cultures and traditions that may not line up exactly with the way that those of us who've spent our lives in parks think about it. But I do think that those twists of bringing perspectives in can really create a new conversation about what we're going to be doing in repairing and rebuilding some of these parks. And I think that we've got an opportunity to create a model that's not only about the impacts, but also an overarching experience that we're all seeing right now is the public is hungry for public lands. The public is hungry for these waterscapes and landscapes. They're essential. And so all of that, I think, tells us that we have to do a really good job, and a job that really reflects a future vision as opposed to just telling the stories of a century ago. And so in a way, we find ourselves in a place in the trajectory of tradition of now having a very real opportunity to describe and define not only the traditions of the past, but now the traditions as we go forward. It's going to be a lot of work. And there's going to be mistakes. There's going to be good ideas, and ideas where pieces work. And I just think that, again, I mean, for me, collaboration is like a thread that runs through all of this, and we're really going to need that.
You mentioned the word collaboration, and I know that's something that you really value. As we move forward during the pandemic, with the fires right now posing so many challenges, and in a post-COVID world, how do you see collaboration and relationship building play out? And what are some insights that you have had in the past in your work experience that you'd love to bring in this position
Sure.
and in your work now?
Thank you. Thank you for asking that question, Yakuta. You know, I worked at a research university, where there are professors diving deep into various subject areas, you know, amazing world-class soil scientists, amazing watershed scientists and fire scientists, climatologists, and climate scientists. And I've worked in parks. For the last 6 years, I served on the California Water Commission, and really learned a lot about the work of water in California and the infrastructure that we've built in the state, and also how we manage water in the state. I also, over the last 12 years, was an elected official where I live and served on this water district board. And all of that together, to me, shows an astonishing opportunity of connecting all these activities and programs that currently operate almost outside of each other. And I'll give you an example. You know, the state has a flood control board, and they go to Washington and get money to control floodwaters. And generally what that has meant is that, how do we move water out of the valley fast enough that it doesn't create a problem and create a flood? At the same time, that now what we're looking at is, how do we capture water, store it in the ground and in surface storage? And that's part of what the Water Commission was working on. And DWR is doing, the Department of Water Resources is doing all this work around water management. There's new laws that require now that we manage groundwater basins. And so when you look at that whole connection of problems that need to be solved, what I actually see are a bunch of solutions if you start putting that together. You know, imagine flood control district working with the groundwater folks to move water over to where it can be put back into the ground in the San Joaquin and the Sacramento Valley, rather than shunt it off quickly. I mean, we'll have to still do that, but here's the other thing. These are natural lands problems, and or they're treated as problems. But imagine if you start combining the goals of flood control, state water storage, groundwater storage, public recreation. And I think that there could be new collaborations that actually end up being a financial agreement as well as an operational agreement, because none of us have the money to do everything we want to do as agencies. The public is also pretty reluctant to pay fees and such. But I think that we have an opportunity by creating these collaborations like One TAM, like Redwoods Rising, like the work that's been done at Santa Monica Mountains. And what that does is it allows us to tell a story. And I think that for the broader public, it ends up being a story of the dependency that we have on these systems. And because we have to get the public understanding that we have to become engaged owners of these landscapes to keep them healthy. And so, I mean, that's sort of a general statement, but it also isn't. I think that there's some really interesting puzzles out there that could be assembled in such a way that we see literally multiple benefits, including restorative experiences for the mind and body for the public, along with healthier water, healthier air, fewer catastrophic fires. It becomes quite an amazing list. And I don't think I'm being Pollyanna-ish about it. It's going to take time, but I think that we can seek opportunities and projects where we can do things like that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Armando. And I saw a smile on your face when you said restorative practices. And every time I hear from you, I see how you not only bring that external perspective of external change that needs to happen at an institutional level and at a landscape level, but I've heard you constantly bring up this feeling of there has to be that internal change that needs to happen. And by that, I mean, I know you're talking about parks as spaces for healing and bringing attention to that mindfulness and that spiritual aspect of parks.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious to hear from you, what excites you about that work and how do you see it play out or brought out in the work that you're going to do?
I mean, I love being surprised. I love having my perspective twisted in a way that the world suddenly, solutions are there that I didn't see. Also like to know when the hazards appear that I didn't see. But I think that what excites me is what can happen when we really empower people in an organization? What can happen when we really empower the partnerships that exist within these organizations? I mean, when I think about, frankly, and I've said this in different ways in the last month, but I do recognize that there's wisdom in the whole community of park, park employees that have worked for the agency for 5 years or for 25 years. Park partners who've been amazing advocates for political support as well as financial support for parks. I mean, the families that come to parks. I've spent a lot of time working with kids. As my daughters were growing up, I did a lot of science teaching and field trip leading. And really I can blame, I know that you know the story at Yakuta, but I took my daughter's class on a field trip to Mount Tamalpais, which is where we have reservoirs for our water here. And it was a botany field trip, and they were in 4th grade. And after the field trip, days after, my 4th grade daughter screamed for me in the house, and I found her in our bathroom, and she was standing in front of a toilet with her hands like this. And I walked in and she said, "We are not flushing our toilets with that beautiful water, Dad, are we?" And she wouldn't let me hug her. But I know that what I said to her was, "I'm afraid we're handing you problems that you guys are gonna have to figure out." And she was furious. I mean, disgusted, and she stomped away. 4 years later, 2 friends of mine invited me to consider running for the water board. I brought it up at dinner with my 2 daughters and my wife. That 4th grader is now an 8th grader, right? And as soon as I said what I was considering, she crossed her arms and she said, "I thought you said you couldn't do anything." And I credit my daughter with pushing me in the direction of water. Absolutely. And I think that it was her vision, her new eyes, that had a profound impact on me. And so that's what I would bring to the table, is that how do we work together to see both the incremental and potentially profound impacts that we can create literally together.
Armando, I know your daughters have been a huge inspiration for you and your mentors in so many ways. How would your daughters best describe you?
Well, if you'd asked them 2 years ago, they might have said I was 7 years old. I think they'll say, they would say 8 years old now. No, they're very, no, I mean, they do, boy, I don't know how they describe me. We get along really well. And they, and I refer to them as my teachers. I always have, actually. And have treated them with respect since they were little. In fact, one time when they were little, I got mad at them about something, and I think they both even stood up and looked at me and said, "We should put you in timeout." And so they did. They could. It wasn't a permission thing. It was like an agreement. But I remember thinking they only did it a few times because I learned. But I remember thinking, "Oh my goodness, these women are going to assert themselves in the world," you know. And so, you know, I don't know. I mean, we get along. We respect each other is what I would say very much, and value each other very much. So thanks for asking that.
Thanks, Armando. I see a lot of really rich questions coming up. So I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we'll get to questions from all our participants. I'm curious to hear from you, Armando. What is something you would tell someone who is starting off in environmental and conservation work in the parks world? Or what would you tell your younger self, perhaps?
Embrace the things you love, and learn those things deeply, and also realize that you always have a choice, and also ultimately, I think that everybody's a teacher. We've all had those teachers that have taught us things that we will never do in our lives, as well as real good models and role models. But I would say it's really to really embrace the things you love, and don't be afraid to diversify. I think that when I was on the Water Commission, and even now, I do think that one of the values, or one of the attributes that we all have, is the attribute of naivete. And I tell people all the time, don't be afraid of that. Not understanding something is an opportunity to ask a question, and you never know what you're going to reveal, what's going to be revealed through your question. And I also think that, and I think we've all experienced this, that the same question answered at a different time elicits a different answer. So that's really how I think about the role that I'm in now. No matter the questions, no matter the answers that I've had in the past about things, these are new questions and these are new answers, and that's what we're looking for.
Thank you, Armando. I love the wisdom you bring, and I hope to continue these conversations with you. I know this is the beginning of many. I'm going to start looking at all the questions that are coming up from participants. So there's a few, and I'll thank Sharon and Devin for sending those across. So the first question is from Heidi Doyle in Sierra State Parks Foundation. And Heidi asks, what do you see as the future role of your nonprofit partners? And how can we help in creating an inclusive and welcoming park environment?
I mean, parks would not exist without partners. I mean, Big Basin was created as a state park because of the lobbying efforts of the Save the Redwoods League. And as soon as that park was established, Save the Redwoods, along with some legislators, put a bond question on the ballot, and it was passed, and it was the first $6 million that were set aside to purchase new lands for this new system. But here's the thing, that very first bond language required that philanthropy and private citizens match that money dollar for dollar. And so a couple things to Heidi's question. One of them is, I think it's important to remind ourselves that these parks were literally born out of partnership. That is their strength. That's the double helix, really. And I think that the important thing too is how do we collaborate? How do we work together so that we can support each other and not be, and be able to advance priorities as a team. I'll mention another book that one of my wizards recommended to me, and it's called Six Thinking Hats. And it's and you can just read the preface and you'll know what the idea is. It's a little book by the Brookings Institute. But it actually describes a way of working together so that everybody's facing the same direction at the same time as you move through a process. Sounds simple. People resist it all the time, but you see what I'm saying. And so I think, to Heidi's question, I think that the continued relationship management that occurs with park partners is going to be critical. And also, I hope that we're able to provide, as a collective team, among park partners in the state parks employees and workforce, is a way of really gaining, I think of it almost as branding, the branding of the whole park system and partnership relationship. And then you have regional, there's regional topics and focus that come up. And as we've learned in the collaborative landscape environment, that cooperation can suddenly make for some big gains, as a team. And so I'm hoping that I start seeing that sort of action.
Thanks, Armando. So the next question, there's a lot of warm welcomes for you, Armando,
Well,
and just lots of fans.
Here, my goodness.
I've been monitoring the chat as well, and so there's just lots of excitement and deep gratitude for you as well. And this question asks, habitat restoration often takes years of work from site prep to monitoring. In state parks, many of our budgets operate on 2 or 4 year cycles. How can we re-envision our funding to match our realities of on-the-ground restoration work? What an important question.
That taps into some really important notions. And my favorite, as a director, I've had several folks pretty much say, if we just had the money and the staff, we could do this. And my favorite quote around the question that you have, which is about budget and people, and the work, is, there isn't a silver bullet. What we're going to have to do is find silver buckshot. And so one of the things that I think is going to be important going forward is literally, along with all the branches of work that we do within the Parks Agency, and I've been talking with the folks over in Natural Resources about this, I really think that we need a team of advisors who are finance advisors, because I think we need to develop portfolios of potential funding. And so I don't know what, I'm not going to give you a specific example, but I was at Lake Tahoe 2 weeks ago, and I was looking at areas that had been burned through the forest management program up there. So there were control burns, and it was a very good tour. But at one point we stopped. On one side of the fire road was a place that had had a control burn 15 years ago. And you can visualize that. It was the forest was open. There were trees of ages. There was understory. There was ceanothus and lupin and all these nitrogen fixing plants. And then literally across the road is a dense forest canopy up in the Tahoe forest. And the presentation that we got was about how forest thinning really preserved or avoided catastrophic fires. And when the person was finished, I said, we really need to be broader than this in the conversations that we have. Because as an example, soil health on the planet, if all the soils on the planet were healthy, the soils could sequester twice the amount of carbon of all the vegetation. There's a value to that. And I might even say an economic value that can be understood from that. Healthy soils also retain water. They're living sponges. So healthy soils contribute to both water health and water supply. When you have a dense canopy in the forest, the snow will fall up there and a lot of it won't make it to the ground. And so what happens is, what's the word? Sublimation. When you have snow up in the forest canopy and it starts to warm up, it never drips down to the ground, or a lot of it doesn't drip to the ground as water, it evaporates as a gas. So water that could have been healthy for the forest system, for the soil system, for the streams and rivers and all the downstream water systems is lost, if you will. And so I think about how do we look at the collection of resources in public lands, and parks can be a part of that, not the solution, but a place where those stories can be told. And I mean, imagine if every household in the state put $5 a month into a fund to improve watershed health in the state. It would be huge. And I do think that, and there also, when I talk about financing as an opportunity, there are new institutions that are building their private equity investment models around improving system health. You can look these two up. Look up Blue Forest, and they do forest restoration, and it's all funded through private investors. And then there's another group that's called Ecosystem Partners. Take a look at those two models, just as an example. And I do think that there's room for us as land managers and as conservation practitioners to start working with the actual monetary value of the things that we're operating in and protecting. Sorry.
Thanks, Armando. So we have another question from Craig Strang, and I'm sorry, participants, if I'm not pronouncing your first name or your last name correctly. What role can state parks play in promoting K-12 outdoor learning, and especially carrying out the state's blueprint for environmental literacy?
The GATE, you mean the gifted program? Is that what did you say GATE, G-A-T-E?
What role, I'll repeat the question. What role can state parks play in promoting K-12 outdoor learning, and especially carrying out the state's blueprint for environmental literacy?
Wow. I mean, that's a world of ideas. And I mean, it's a world of ideas, and we need all of you. But I'll give you just one personal example. In this COVID shelter in place, my garage is sort of an art studio, and it's where my naturalist stuff is. So it's a big jumble, as you might imagine. I was cleaning it up, and I came across a bunch of objects that were, and I was looking at these things and I was thinking, man, if I had this when I was 6 years old, I would have felt like I was the king. And so what I did is I put together boxes, and it had stuff like a compass, a wooden park ranger badge, you know, from a park someplace, pastels, kids' field guides to birds or to plants. It was just this jumble of, and then I actually came across some, they actually worked okay, kids' binoculars. And I set up these packages and I sent them to the 5- and 6-year-old children of my nieces and nephews. And all it had on it was their name on the mailing label. And my nieces and nephews called me about a week after they got the packages. And in both instances, what the kids did is they cut out the mailing labels and had it on their wall in their bedroom because they'd never gotten a package before in the mail. And there were all these videos of these children exploring the world without instruction.
Good.
And my niece's daughter, Emmeline, had a compass on a lanyard around her neck. And she's talking to the camera and she goes, I can go anywhere in the world with this. It'll tell me where I am. And then she was describing this magical thing. And then she goes, hello? And she and started talking to her friend about where she was somewhere in the world. But I think that it's up to us in terms of our imagination, but I also will say that it's up to us to unleash the imaginations of children in these places. And the videos that I was sent from my niece was in her backyard. And I would say that's the other piece of this. And that is that a hope for me would be that the programs and the work that we do as public lands agencies, as park managers that are looking at both natural and cultural history, is that kids realize that where they live matters, that where they live is a part of that story, you know, and so I guess that's my answer.
And these are the moments that we have to hold close to our heart and continue to face the challenges that lay ahead of us, right? Thank you for sharing that. That just warmed my heart. This is not a question, but a comment. I think this is in response to your previous answer, Armando. Tremendous point made by the director. A great role for parks would be to assemble a pool of philanthropic donors for the nonprofit partners to pitch to. So that's just a comment that came our way. And I'm going to read the next question and also do a quick time check. Okay, we have a few more minutes, so we can take a few more questions. Here's one. How do you see the value of multiple use on state parks units, and how do you plan to oversee parks for all users, from hikers to motorized rec to equestrians?
I mean, we have to recognize the breadth of the public as stakeholders. And we have a challenge, and it's a statutory challenge, right? We have the laws that tell us what we can and cannot do in different areas of public land. And that ends up becoming, I guess, I think about that as a question of how do we create stakeholders that really support the statutes that allow and enhance, that allows for the uses that they're doing, as well as enhancing in the right areas those uses, you know. And you know, there's a lot of rethinking about. Well, there's a really good book called Engineering Eden. Some of you may know about that. But the premise of the book is that, you know, we've had these areas that we've called wilderness, and we thought we were treating them appropriately, but in fact, we have been engineering them by removing fire, by removing a lot of the factors that really would have made them healthier landscapes had we done that over the last 150, 170 years. I think that the stakeholders represent perspectives, solutions, and ownership that in the end, I would hope strengthens the health of these public lands as well as their accessibility. And of course, you know, a quick thing on this, and that is that I'm always amused when people talk about traditional uses. And I always tease folks when that comes up and say, so what year are you going to pick? 1860, you know, 1910, 2015, where we can walk around with $10,000 worth of equipment on our back, you know, if you can afford it. You know, there's all these definitions of tradition, which I think are super interesting and complex. I don't know the answer, but how we work with all those user groups is critical.
Thank you. Let's take one more question and then we'll start wrapping up. This one's from Jay Watson. The state parks have been and continue to be hit by wildfires. Given the economic and public importance of these parks in the age of COVID, do you think there will be additional state monies for fire recovery in affected parks?
This is a big conversation in the Natural Resources Agency right now. And like I said, I think we're really going to have to identify the silver buckshot as we go forward. And I think it's really going to demand all all brains on deck. You know, we need the broadest thinking possible. I know that in areas there is work with tribes and folks who've been practicing more traditional forms of land management. I think we're going to need all of it. And we also, obviously, we're going to need science. We're going to need science that's telling us, is this working? What is working, what is not? And there isn't going to be a perfect solution for a while. It's going to take some learning to get there.
You know, Armando, I'm going to take up some of my time that I was going to use to wrap up. And I'm going to ask you one more question, because I know this is on everyone's minds and we're all facing these challenges together as a collective. So we have a question here. Thank you for sharing about the need for sharing more of the human story in our state parks and changing the narrative of our park stories that has been stagnant for many years. What do you intend to do to help amplify and empower these stories by providing a space for a more diverse workforce?
That's a heavy question and an important one. Honestly, it's going to take intentionality. It's going to take us. My dog wants in the room. It's going to take intentionality. We can't say, well, this is the way we've always done this. And I also really believe that if we look at the organizations in which we all work, you can reverse engineer career paths in those organizations, and you'll find several things. There are these, what I think of as natural pathways in organizations. So when we recruit new people, we should be basically putting them inside those natural pathways. I think artificial recruitment programs can be deadly because they label people who go into the program. There's a perception oftentimes that those people are not qualified. And in my experience in working for 3 years in personnel and in doing recruitment, it was easy to find women and ethnic minorities that were highly skilled. So there's that. And then the other thing, and I'll finish with this because I see Sharon on the screen. And that is that when we think about recruitment for public lands, we need to be thinking beyond people who want to be employees of those public land agencies. Think about this. Imagine if you hire a young person who's in economics at college but wanted to work in your Redwood Park for a couple summers, and that person ends up becoming the CEO of Microsoft. We need to be thinking about recruitment in the broadest sense when we think about workforce and the future of public lands.
Thank you.
It's so hard. It's so hard to cut a great conversation short. We knew that it would be easy to fill an hour. And I just want to thank those of you that chose to spend your lunch. I want to especially thank Armando and Yakuta for bringing insights and sharing their thoughts and passions, and also answering the questions that many of you had. I just wanted to let folks know we did record this. We will share the link. Please share it broadly. For the questions that Director Quintero was not able to answer, we will be sharing those questions with him as well as the chat. And I hope you all have a good rest of your Monday. If you want to learn more about the network, the website is posted. You can certainly reach any of us who work as volunteers supporting the network. And then for those of you who participate in the network, just a quick plug, we're actually going through our re-envisioning and looking towards our future. So please fill out the survey link that we sent. So again, thank you all for joining. Thank you, Director Quintero. And as a friend, Armando, thank you for all that you bring and all that you will continue to bring in your support and service to California and its communities. And with that, I wish you well. Take care.
Thank you.